Hi, I'm Arthur. I'll tell my story. They say the devil is in the details. I've always found that to be profoundly true. It's never the grand, sweeping gesture that gives you away. It's the tiny, almost imperceptible crack in the facade. A micro-expression, a shift in routine, a hesitation a fraction of a second too long. For 12 years as an intelligence analyst, my job was to find those cracks in the armor of enemies of the state. I never imagined I'd be using the same skills to find them in my own marriage. My name is Arthur Reed. I am 55 years old, and my life, for all intents and purposes, was a perfectly curated portrait of upper-middle-class success. A beautiful home in a respectable London neighborhood, a wife who was the envy of other men, a career that had been both demanding and fulfilling before I transitioned into private consultancy. It was a quiet life, a good life, or so I believed. The first crack appeared subtly. Eleanor, my wife of 15 years, started coming home later from her art gallery. She claimed it was a new exhibition, a demanding artist. Plausible. But then the scent changed. She'd always worn a light floral perfume, something I'd bought for her on our 5th anniversary. She started coming home smelling of something else, something darker, more musky, and underneath it the faint, clean smell of soap, as if she'd showered just before coming home. Again.
Then came the phone. Eleanor's phone, which had once lived on the kitchen counter or tucked into her book, now lived in her handbag, screened down on the dinner table, a tiny fortress of secrecy. When it buzzed, her eyes would flicker towards it with a quickness she couldn't hide. A faint, unconscious smile would touch her lips before she schooled her features back into wifely concern. "How was your day, Arthur?" I'd nod, sipping my wine, my own analytical mind, which I'd tried so hard to quiet in civilian life, snapping back to life with a cold, familiar clarity. Pattern recognition, behavioral shift, potential threat. The final, undeniable crack came at the Covent Garden Opera House. I was watching Eleanor from the bar as she chatted with a group of patrons. A man joined them, young, impossibly handsome in a sharp, expensive suit that screamed of new money, not old class. Chad Vanderbilt. I'd seen his name in the financial pages, a tech wunderkind. I saw the way his hand rested on the small of her back a fraction of a second too long to be polite. I saw the way she leaned into the touch, her laughter a little too bright, her eyes a little too wide. And then I saw him look over her head, directly at me. His gaze wasn't curious or friendly. It was assessing, dismissive. It was the look a lion gives a wildebeest. It has no immediate intention of eating, but knows it easily could.
He gave me a small, condescending smirk before turning his attention back to my wife. In that moment, the perfect portrait of my life didn't just crack, it shattered. The quiet, analytical part of my brain, the part I thought I'd retired, took over completely. The emotion, the hot, searing bolt of betrayal, was there, but I compartmentalized it, locked it away. There would be time for that later. Right then, I had a mission. The mission was no longer about protecting national secrets. It was about understanding the scope of the breach in my own home. It was about gathering intelligence on the enemy. As we drove home in silence, Eleanor staring out the window, I replayed every detail of the last few months, the changed perfume, the hidden phone, the long showers, the distance. My name is Arthur Reed. I am 55 years old, and the man they see The quiet, slightly boring husband is about to become the greatest threat they've ever known. They mistook my silence for weakness. They confused my patience with surrender. It was their first and last tactical error. The game, as they say, was now afoot, and I intended to win.
The city's hum replaced the opera's din. I walked, letting the cold air sharpen my mind. Emotion was a liability. I visualized locking the rage away in a steel box. It was contained for now. My training took over. This was an intelligence problem. Two variables: Eleanor, whose patterns had shifted, new perfume, secretive phone use, emotional distance, and Chad Vanderbilt, the disruptor, arrogant, wealthy, with a taste for others' possessions. The hypothesis? A sustained affair. Their public complacency was their weakness. They never saw the analyst in the audience. I needed proof. In a quiet pub, I called my only contact from the agency, a field man turned private consultant, discreet and expensive. "Arthur Reed, to what do I owe the honor?" his gruff voice answered. "Due diligence, deep and quiet, Chad Vanderbilt." A pause. He understood the subtext. The wunderkind. Angle? Full picture. Financials, irregularities, offshore holdings, personal proclivities. Another pause. "Arthur, is this personal?" "It's an intelligence operation. I need a threat assessment."
Understood. He's layered. Will take time. "I'm patient," I said, and ended the call. The first move was made. Home was dark. Eleanor wasn't back. Her handbag sat on a chair, a fortress of secrets. With steady hands, I opened it. Past her locked phone, my fingers found something solid. A heavy black matchbook. No colorful design, just stark embossed letters, Aura. It screamed of discreet luxury, a place for hidden meetings. It was no longer a theory. It was evidence. The key turned in the door. I closed the bag perfectly and moved to the living room. She entered, flushed, smelling of night and foreign perfume. "Arthur, you're awake. Drinks ran long." I looked at her and saw a compromised asset, a leak. "Quite all right, my dear," I said, my smile a perfect mask of weary innocence. I had some thinking to do. The reconnaissance was over. The mission was now active.
The performance I gave that night was my finest. I played the oblivious, weary husband with perfect authenticity. Eleanor, buzzing with nervous energy, offered endless, unnecessary details about her evening. I nodded, the perfect audience. Inside, the analyst cross-referenced her lies with the image of the black matchbook burning in my mind. The next morning, I began Phase 2, infrastructure. A war is won on logistics. With a few clicks and calls to my lawyer, I enacted a quiet financial firewall. Liquid funds were shifted to accounts in my name only. I left just enough in our joint accounts to avoid raising flags. The spider was building its web. Marcus's encrypted report arrived. It was a masterpiece of concise devastation. Subject: Vanderbilt, Chad. Assessment: high risk, high liability. Vanderbilt Holdings was a house of cards, leveraged on investor cash and bravado. The report detailed irregularities in offshore funds and a well-documented pattern of pursuing relationships with women attached to powerful men. It was a profile of a man who believed he was untouchable. He was perfect. His arrogance was his center of gravity. To break him, I needed to shatter that image.
Assessment: high risk, high liability.
The final piece came when Eleanor announced a gallery networking event, a legitimate function, but her eyes held a flicker of excitement and fear, a tell. A check of the attendee roster confirmed it. Chad Vanderbilt was not listed, but he would be. The event was my stage. It was where his presence would be most noticeable. The night of the event, I dressed with care. The man in the mirror was not a wounded husband. He was calm, prepared. I arrived separately, scanning the crowd from the foyer. There they were, not together, but close, a silent signal. I stepped into the light, my movement deliberate. I fixed my gaze on Chad. He saw me. His smile tightened. He excused himself and approached, a condescending grin on his face. "Arthur, this is a surprise. I didn't take you for an art patron." "Mr. Vanderbilt, the surprise is mutual. I wouldn't peg you for a postmodernism enthusiast, but we all have our hidden passions." His grin flickered. The needle had landed. "One must diversify," he recovered, his eyes cold. "Indeed, a sound strategy if one's investments are secure. Some foundations aren't as stable as they appear." Confusion flashed in his eyes, then irritation. He understood the challenge. I saw Eleanor had frozen, her face pale. I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, first to Chad, then to Eleanor, acknowledging them both, linking them. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving them in the wake of an unspoken threat. The unseen hand had made its first move. The next move was theirs.
Of course. The drive home from the gallery was conducted in a silence so profound it felt like a physical presence in the car. Eleanor stared rigidly out the passenger window, her body a taut line of nervous energy. She was waiting for me to speak, to demand an explanation for Chad's presence, to unleash the anger she surely expected. I gave her nothing. I kept my eyes on the road, my hands relaxed on the wheel. The only sound was the soft hum of the engine and the rhythmic swipe of the windshield wipers. My silence was a weapon, more unnerving than any accusation. It denied her the confrontation she was braced for, leaving her alone with her guilt and the chilling uncertainty of what I knew. She finally broke halfway home. "It was a coincidence, you know," she said, her voice too bright, too brittle against the quiet. "Him being there. He's a last-minute donor to the Gallery Foundation. It would have been rude not to invite him." I let the lie hang in the air for 3 full seconds before responding, my voice even and devoid of emotion.
"Of course." Those 2 words, delivered with flat acceptance, were more devastating than any argument. They told her I didn't believe her, and, more importantly, that I didn't care to. The fight was over before it began. She fell silent again, shrinking into her seat. The house felt different when we entered. It was no longer just a site of a breach. It was the operations center. I moved through the rooms with a quiet purpose, making tea, checking the lock on the patio door, mundane actions that were now part of a larger, hidden campaign. Eleanor watched me, a wary confusion in her eyes. The script she had prepared was useless. Her husband was behaving like a stranger, a calm, implacable force she didn't know how to confront. The following days were a master class in psychological pressure. I was present but absent, engaged but detached. I asked about her day with genuine-sounding interest, but my eyes held no warmth, only the cool assessment of an analyst reviewing data. I was dismantling our life together with a terrifying, silent efficiency. I began spending more time in my study. The door closed. I wasn't hiding. I was signaling. Behind that door, I was finalizing the plan. Marcus's report was my map, and Chad's upcoming tech summit, his company's biggest event of the year, was the target. Every detail was checked and rechecked. The encrypted files were prepared for their timed release. The anonymous email accounts were created. The digital footprint was scrubbed and redirected through layers of obfuscation.
One evening, I emerged from the study to find Eleanor standing in the hallway, her arms crossed. She looked tired, the elegant facade beginning to crack under the strain of my unnerving calm. "What are you doing in there all the time, Arthur?" she asked, a note of desperation edging into her voice. I offered her a small, neutral smile. "Just tying up some loose ends, my dear." The vagueness of the answer was a deliberate provocation. It invited her imagination to run wild, to picture any number of threats. She opened her mouth to say more, but I simply walked past her to the kitchen, leaving her standing alone in the hallway, surrounded by the deafening quiet of the home I was systematically unmaking. The calm before the storm is not an absence of activity. It is the final, breathless moment of preparation before the energy is unleashed. I was the calm, and the storm was now on the horizon, ticking closer with every silent, calculated second. The next move was still theirs, but the final move would be irrevocably mine.
The day of the Vanderbilt Holdings Tech Summit arrived cloaked in a perfectly ordinary morning. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows. Eleanor moved around with a nervous energy, casting furtive glances my way. She knew Chad's big day was here. She didn't know it was mine, too. I was the picture of quiet routine. I read the paper, sipped my coffee, and offered a bland comment about the weather. The calm was a lie. Inside, I was a countdown clock, every tick measured and precise. The encrypted files were loaded. The anonymous dissemination protocols were active. The clock on the operation was synced to the summit's main keynote address. Eleanor left first, claiming errands. I knew she was going to the summit. I wished her a pleasant day, my voice a neutral monotone. The door clicked shut. Silence. The house was my command center. I walked to my study, sat at the desk, and opened my laptop. On one screen was the live stream of the summit. On another, a simple console with a single, pulsating button. The stream showed a lavishly staged auditorium. Tech influencers and investors milled about. Chad was at the center of it all, resplendent in an impossibly sharp suit, shaking hands and flashing his trademark grin. The image of invincibility. My phone buzzed. A text from my contact. "In position. Assets are live. Ready on your mark." I didn't respond. My eyes were fixed on the stream. Chad took the stage to a wave of applause. The lights dimmed, leaving him spotlighted. He launched into his pitch, full of buzzwords and grand promises about the future. The crowd was captivated.
He reached his crescendo, unveiling a flashy new product feature. The applause was thunderous. He basked in it, arms raised. This was his peak, the absolute zenith of his hubris. It was time.
My finger hovered over the key. There was no rage, no vengeful thrill, only the cold satisfaction of a perfect calculation. I pressed it. On my screen, a simple confirmation appeared. Back package deployed. For a moment, nothing changed. Chad was still smiling, taking a bow. Then the change began. It started subtly. A few people in the audience looked down at their phones, then a few more. The attentive faces began to morph into confusion, then into shock. The murmur of the crowd shifted, turning from admiration to a low, buzzing alarm. I watched, my expression unchanging, as the wave of realization swept through the room. Phones were held up, shown to neighbors. Heads shook. The live chat on the stream, once full of praise, was now a frantic scroll of question marks and OMG and check the feed. On stage, Chad's smile finally faltered. He could feel the energy in the room shifting violently beneath his feet. He squinted into the lights, trying to understand what was happening. His confidence began to crack, replaced by a dawning panic.
It was time. His PR handler rushed onto the stage, whispering frantically in his ear, his face drained of all color. The image of the powerful tech titan vanished, replaced by that of a confused and terrified boy. The live stream cut abruptly to a corporate logo. Silence. I closed the laptop. The room was quiet. Outside, the sun still shone. The operation was a success. The first domino had fallen. The confidential financial data, the evidence of shady offshore dealings, the internal memos, all of it was now circulating through the veins of the internet, moving faster than any PR team could possibly contain. I stood up and walked to the window. Somewhere across the city, chaos was erupting. Careers were shattering. A reputation was evaporating into thin air. And it had all started with a single, silent click in a perfectly calm room. The storm had not arrived with thunder and lightning. It had arrived on a million screens at once, and its name was truth. Absolute silence filled my study. I stood by the window, observing the calm city outside. My phone lit up with news alerts. I didn't need to look. The headlines wrote themselves. Vanderbilt empire crumbles. Damning documents leaked. The first call came from Eleanor. I let it go to voicemail. A text followed. Arthur, something terrible is happening. Call me. Please. I didn't respond. Let her feel the ground give way beneath her. I checked the news. Vanderbilt stock was in freefall. The documents had spread everywhere. A digital wildfire. Perfect. Phase 2 began. I accessed a secure drive containing a curated file, timelines, receipts, the matchbook photo. I attached it to an email. The subject line was blank. The body contained a single line. Eleanor, I believe you will find these relevant to our ongoing discussions. I hit send. A surgical strike. Her response was immediate, a phone call. This time, I answered. Raw, hyperventilating sobs. Arthur, what? How? I take it you've seen the news, I said, my voice flat. Was this you? She cried. I merely connected the dots, I replied. I made the truth inconvenient. He's ruined, lawsuits. My heart breaks for him, I said, ice in my voice. Worry about yourself. The fallout is expansive. Silence. Then a broken whisper.
What are you going to do? That is no longer your concern. Get a lawyer. I ended the call. I pictured her alone, surrounded by wreckage. I felt nothing. An alert popped up. A Vanderbilt press conference in 1 hour. Damage control. A thin smile. They thought they could contain this with words. They didn't understand. The detonation was only the beginning. The shockwave was still traveling. The unraveling was now self-sustaining. My work was almost done.
Absolute silence filled my study. I stood by the window, observing the calm city outside. My phone lit up with news alerts. I didn't need to look. The headlines wrote themselves. Vanderbilt empire crumbles. Damning documents leaked. The first call came from Eleanor. I let it go to voicemail. A text followed. Arthur, something terrible is happening. Call me, please. I didn't respond. Let her feel the ground give way beneath her. I checked the news. Vanderbilt stock was in free fall. The documents had spread everywhere. A digital wildfire. Perfect. Phase 2 began. I accessed a secured drive containing a curated file, timelines, receipts, the matchbook photo. I attached it to an email. The subject line was blank. The body contained a single line. Eleanor, I believe you will find these relevant to our ongoing discussions. I hit send, a surgical strike.
Her response was immediate. A phone call. This time, I answered. Raw, hyperventilating sobs. Arthur, what? How? I take it you've seen the news, I said, my voice flat. Was this you? She cried. I merely connected the dots. I made the truth inconvenient. He's ruined. Lawsuits. My heart breaks for him, I said, ice in my voice. Worry about yourself. The fallout is expensive. Silence. Then a broken whisper. What are you going to do? That is no longer your concern. Get a lawyer. I ended the call. I pictured her alone, surrounded by wreckage. I felt nothing. An alert popped up. A Vanderbilt press conference in 1 hour. Damage control. A thin smile. They thought they could contain this with words. They didn't understand. The detonation was only the beginning. The shockwave was still traveling. The unraveling was now self-sustaining. My work was almost done.
6 months later, the air in my new apartment was clean, silent, and entirely my own. It was a space of simple, functional beauty, a place for thought, not for show. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over a different part of the city, not the old money neighborhoods we had inhabited, but an area humming with quiet efficiency. I stood there, a cup of black coffee in my hand, watching the morning sun paint the glass towers in hues of gold and orange. The newspaper lay open on the minimalist dining table. The business section, of course. A small, unremarkable article was buried on page 5. Vanderbilt assets finally liquidated, investors left with pennies. It was a footnote, a final, formal obituary for a corpse that had long since cooled.
I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no remorse. It was simply a closed file. My phone buzzed, a single, efficient vibration, a message from my lawyer. The divorce was final, all terms met. The last loose end had been tied. I replied with a single word: acknowledged. I had heard snippets about Eleanor through the legal channels. She had moved in with a sister in another state. There had been talk of her starting over, perhaps opening a small consulting firm. The money from the settlement was substantial, but it was a fraction of what she'd expected, and it came with the permanent stain of her very public downfall. She was free, but she was building her new life on the ruins of the old one.
As for Chad Vanderbilt, he had vanished. The gossip columns had briefly tried to track him, spotted skiing in Switzerland, hiding out on a private island, but the interest had faded as quickly as his fortune. He was a ghost, a cautionary tale told at tech conferences, a man who had everything and lost it to his own arrogance. My own life had been pared down to its essentials. I ran most mornings, something I hadn't done consistently since my service days. The rhythm of my feet on the pavement, the burn in my lungs, it was a different kind of discipline, a cleansing one. I read. I worked on selective consultancy projects for old contacts who valued discretion above all else. I enjoyed the silence. That evening, I drove up into the hills outside the city. I parked and walked to a cliff edge that overlooked the vast, twinkling grid of the metropolis. The air was cool and sharp. The noise of the city was a distant hum, a world away. I thought about the chain of events, the betrayal, the plan, the execution. I had won. I had dismantled my enemies with a precision that would have made my old commanders proud. I had my freedom, my peace, and my revenge, served ice cold and exact. But as I stood there, under the infinite expanse of the starry sky, I realized the victory was not in their destruction. It was in my liberation. I was no longer the quiet husband, the patient analyst, or the vengeful strategist. I was just a man on a cliff, under the stars, answerable to no one. The strongest moves are not those made in anger. They are those made in silence, with patience, and with the absolute certainty that you can live with the outcome. I finished my coffee. The city glittered below, full of noise and drama and people making the same old mistakes. I turned my back on it and walked toward my car and my quiet, unhaunted home. The game was over, and I was finally at peace.